Mike Bernard from OTM Sports out in Las Vegas with us every Sunday morning to go over the college football action from yesterday. Mike, let's just get right into the action. Georgia 27, Tennessee 13. I came away from this game with some no doubts. No doubt Tennessee's a talented football team. No doubt Georgia is a talented football team. There's no doubt Georgia's used to playing in big games, and there's no doubt that Tennessee showed that they're not quite ready for the biggest stage yet. Georgia took control early and never looked back.
Yeah, it was clear that Georgia's been in this spot many times and Tennessee has not. In our preview, we talked about the recency bias and how the public remembered Tennessee 52, Alabama 49. I gave out under here on that segment because in big games, coaches and players get tight, and that's what happened. It stayed well under. Georgia was a dominating defense again, but not to knock Josh Heupel because he's done an outstanding job, but you could tell he was like being interviewed. It was pressured speech, and he was nervous and he was uncertain, and that always carries over to the players. And I guess as a coach, you'd know better than I. Maybe not always, but it seemed like it did on Saturday. Georgia covered. Public was all over Tennessee all week to the tune of 80+% of the tickets. But Saturday morning, some sharp groups came in and they played Georgia, so it went up to 9. And of course, it was, I wouldn't call it anticlimactic, but it didn't live up to the billing of what most had thought.
No, we talked about on Friday about was there any possibility that this game could live up to the hype? And really, after the first couple of drives, the hype was really gone.
Yeah, and that's to be expected. You can't have a game of the century every week out, even if it's 1 versus 1 or 1 versus 3, depending on the rankings. Now, Georgia has road trips to Mississippi State and Kentucky. Their finale is home against Georgia Tech. Tennessee has Mizzou, South Carolina, and Vandy. They're going to finish 11-1. They're hoping for chaos at the top of the rankings. They already have one little piece of the puzzle happen. Clemson, they fell short. So Tennessee still has hope.
Speaking of Clemson, Notre Dame 35, Clemson 14. As Dabo said, it was just a really bad day, and it really was. Irish started out right out of the blocks with another block punt. Their special teams has been outstanding all year. Scoop and score for TD. They go up. Clemson just never seemed in sync, and even the changing quarterbacks to mix things up didn't help. It really was over for Clemson. They were driving, trying to cut into that 21-0 lead, and then they get a 96-yard pick six. That put Notre Dame up 28-0 early in the fourth quarter. You talked about Tennessee and what they're hoping for. Right now, a one-loss Tennessee team looks a lot better than a one-loss Clemson team just because of who they lost to. I mean, losing to Georgia in Georgia's backyard is better than losing to a subpar Notre Dame team.
Okay, let's clarify this right now. Clemson is out of college football playoff consideration. They just lost to Notre Dame, who is playing better, but Notre Dame lost to Marshall and an abysmal Stanford team that was drubbed last night, 52-14, at home by Washington State. So, but again, with that said, the Irish are at 6-3. They power rate fairly high, but Notre Dame ran all over Clemson. Coach, I have to wonder if the Tigers would get gashed if Venables was still there.
And you get a different team every week. I don't care unless you've sat in those staff meetings week after week after week. You don't realize that it's not the same team every week. It doesn't matter who it is because, you'll get a situation where, and this is just pulling teams out of the air here, but you say that, say a UAB goes into LSU Death Valley and beats them as they did some 22 years ago, but they go in and they beat LSU. And then that 2 weeks later, Louisiana Tech beats UAB. Does that mean that Louisiana Tech is better than LSU? No. Does it really even mean that UAB was better than LSU? No, it just means they beat them on that particular night. So you get a different team every week. And to me, this Clemson team, they've lost their consistency. And I don't think it's got anything to do with Venables being gone or what have you. They've just lost the consistency. But again, that happens throughout programs. It doesn't diminish what the Tigers have accomplished.
It doesn't, because if we go back and look at 15, 16, 17, and 18, Clemson was in the title game, I believe, every year during that span. And they won 2 of them against Alabama. And so the bar has been set super high, right? So last year, remember, Pitt won the ACC. Everyone's like, oh, Clemson, they're in total disarray. Well, they won 10 games. They're just not that 4-year span Clemson team that was just absolutely dominant. Great win for the Irish. They win outright. They were an underdog, and the game just somehow goes over the 44 points. Like you said, it was 28-0 in the fourth quarter. Clemson couldn't do anything. That's that occasionally happens when you have these low totals in college football. Coach, I'm looking forward to November 26th. Notre Dame's going to go out to LA and take on USC. I think USC has major holes, and I think Notre Dame can run all over Lincoln Riley's team.
I think that Cal exposed that last night, and Cal is not a good football team. They're not a complete football team.
They're a well-coached team, but they're not talented.
No, not at all. And I think they exposed USC in some spots where if you put talent, and I'm not even convinced that UCLA is not going to give USC a good run for the money, if not beat them.
Yeah, maybe so. That Chip Kelly's got it going. At UCLA they had the loss, but that's a big improvement from last year to this year.
Yeah, and let me say this: one thing that will probably help Tennessee, and let's just say that Tennessee, again, as we expect them to do, they run the table, they finish 11-1. That Oregon team, depending upon what happens, if there's any question about it, the only 2 losses that Oregon and Tennessee would have to Georgia, and as we say right now, sort of like as we used to talk about with Alabama when they were just on their super dominant run, is that, hey, no shame in losing to Georgia right now.
No, and I know it was the first game of the year, but people are not going to forget when Georgia just absolutely drubbed Oregon in that game.
Last night down in Baton Rouge, another classic game between Alabama and LSU. I mean, it lived up to the hype, and there really wasn't a lot of hype around it, but to me, this was the best game of the day yesterday. I know I'm going to get some pushback on this from some people, but I don't care. Bryce Young, still the best player in America, means more to his team than anyone else. He showed it again last night. Touchdown pass with a little under 5 minutes to go to give the Tide a 21-17 lead. Jaden Daniels, LSU quarterback, who's a childhood friend of Bryce Young's, who they've competed against each other all their lives. He's not too bad of a quarterback himself. He led the Tigers to go ahead score with 1 minute and 47 seconds left. You thought that, hey, LSU's going to get out of here with the win, but clutch throws by Young and creating space with his feet gets Alabama in field goal position. Will Reichert blasts through a 46-yarder by just a couple of feet with 21 seconds to go, goes to overtime. Alabama scores on their first possession. LSU, first play out of overtime, Daniels 25-yard run, and then Brian Kelly shows his guts and he goes for the win. Mason Taylor, outstanding freshman wide receiver, tight end, catches the 2-point conversion at the pylon. For Alabama right now, no SEC championship, no college football playoffs. as crazy as this sounds, the Tigers control their own path. This scenario wouldn't have even seemed possible walking out of the Superdome after that Florida State loss.
Absolutely not. Tigers win outright as a 2-touchdown dog. The game goes over in overtime. That was a bad beat for underplayers. And Bryce Young, he was outstanding again. This Alabama team could be power ranked lower than any Alabama team since 2007, maybe on par with the 2014 team. But Bryce Young is the quarterback. And if it weren't for him, they would have 2 or 3 losses easily. They have 2 losses now. They might have 3 or 4. This Alabama team, even though they're power ranked lower than most of Saban's teams, they lost on the road in Knoxville by a last-second field goal. They lost in Baton Rouge on a 2-point conversion in overtime. And, I don't know what can be done about the fans coming on the field. We talked about it, but that's a problem.
It's a huge problem. And, you and I have talked about this off the air just over the years but now it's kind of come the way of the Gatorade bath. And I'll never forget the first time that the Gatorade bath happened was I believe it was a Super Bowl, wasn't it? It was the Giants, and they soaked Parcells. And then all of a sudden, everyone from colleges to high schools to peewee teams are giving the coach a Gatorade bath. We're 2-9 and we beat another 2-9 team, and let's give our coach a Gatorade bath. Just it's crazy. And that's what the storming the field has become. The next thing that we'll see is a 2-9 team beating a 4-8 team, and they're going to rush the field and tear down the goalpost. It's just a fad, and they can do something about it. It's real simple. They can control this because all they've got to do is start putting handcuffs on people and having serious consequences for coming on that field, and it'll stop. I guarantee you right now it'll stop. And because when one of these goalposts and they're not little flimsy pieces of plastic.
They're not aluminum.
No. And when one of these goalposts comes down and paralyzes someone from the neck down or kills them, it'll stop then.
Yeah, it'll be too late, of course. And that's the only thing. I don't mind unruly fans. It's just the safety aspect. And maybe shouldn't have even brought that up, because I don't want to take away from the game, because the game was as entertaining and dramatic as you could ask for. LSU gets their 7th win. Remember, Vegas only had them listed their season win total at 6.5. And you mentioned some of the scenarios. Does LSU win out and become the first 2-loss college football playoff team? Or do they cave to the pressure of November and lose at Arkansas or Texas A&M? Does Ole Miss, what do they do? But I got a feeling Ole Miss, the last thing they want to see is a 2-loss Alabama team coming in to play spoiler role.
I think so. In this LSU team, and of course, there's so many different scenarios right now that could play out. Realistically, if you just play the games on paper, you think that Alabama's going to go beat Ole Miss, and then LSU, even if they lose one of those 2 games to Arkansas or Texas A&M, still goes to Atlanta. Now, with 3 losses, I don't see that there's any way that they get into college football playoffs, regardless of what happens in Atlanta. But if a 2-loss LSU team goes into Atlanta and beats Georgia, who will probably be ranked number 1, there's no way that you keep them out.
Oh, you'll have 2 SEC teams again, and then the SEC fatigue will continue to grow. And again, that's why Clemson losing, because if Clemson doesn't lose that game, they're probably not going to lose a game, right? So that was big to get them out of the way. TCU, they're a good story, but they're going to lose. They got to go to Texas. They might lose 2 games this month. Okay.
Mhm.
But they're going to lose. They'll eliminate themselves. So that's why it kind of opens the door. And then the debate might be on the big game, Michigan, Ohio State. If that game is close and you got an undefeated and a one loss, that could be a debate as well.
Listen, a buddy of mine who, again, is right in the middle of SEC country and is all things SEC. He gave me the scenario last night where Georgia, Tennessee, and LSU get into the college football playoffs. That the winner of the Michigan Ohio State game goes ahead and runs the table, and they're in as the number 1 seed. And 2, 3, and 4 are 3 SEC schools. But and who knows, with the way things are shaping up right now, we don't know what's going to happen. And there's some games this week that, even though they're kind of under the radar, are going to have some implications. And we'll be talking about a lot of those later in the week. But let's just look ahead real quick to Alabama Ole Miss. Ole Miss coming off a bye week. How much gas does Alabama have in the tank after just a heartbreaker at LSU?
Well, we'll see. Maybe it takes some pressure off, but again, we have Alabama as the lowest power rated team going back to at least 14, right? And if they're going to do as Bryce Young does, because the defense, Coach, that's one thing I have to ask you. I meant to ask you off the air this morning. I saw a lot of breakdowns defensively that I haven't seen from a Nick Saban defense. I'm talking guys running wide open. Was that play design from LSU, or just because you hear the rumblings about the personal issues on the defensive coaching staff down there? So is that a combination of those two things? Because guys are running wide open down the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, and again, unless you are there every single day from sun up to sundown, you really don't know all the dynamics that play into this. But I can tell you one thing that does play into it is that, again, both offensive and defensive coordinators pick up on these things, and this is why they have 14,000 analysts on staff. Is they figure out, hey, look, if we can get them in this certain coverage by formation them to that coverage, or motioning them to that coverage, or this is what they do anytime that it's 3rd and 8+ or what have you, any of those scenarios, then they will create what coordinators, what we call key busters. We're going to give you the look that we're going to do exactly what we've done the last 7 weeks. And then all of a sudden, boom, no, we haven't. Because coverages have gotten so complicated now with RPOs ruling the offensive world. Coverages have gotten so complicated. It used to be that the big thing was the receivers read the coverage, and then they respond with a route based upon the coverage. And now coverages are trying to base their coverage off what routes that the receivers are running. And so there's no one particular reason you see that. It's just part of the game. This in this era of, we're going to read formations and we're going to read routes after the snap. It's just part of it right now.
Well, if LSU exposed Alabama to that level, I mean, with all the different formations and schemes that Ole Miss has, that could be a problem. But again, it just has the feel that Alabama's going to go in and beat Ole Miss because, just to muddy up the water, and then that clears the path for LSU. Although LSU did have the tiebreaker over Ole Miss, I understand. But that'll make it where it's totally clear. Then LSU just needs to stay clean until Atlanta. And I don't think we're going to have multiple teams in the college football playoff unless LSU were to win out and beat Georgia.
One thing that Alabama has to do this week, they got to go into Ole Miss with a simplified game plan defensively. because there's no one in the country better than Lane Kiffin at creating mismatches by formation. Well, and Sark's up there too, and of course they grew up together in the coaching world, and there's a lot of commonality between those two. But no one, we saw that during his time with Alabama when he had the hosses to really make you pay for it. But there is no one that creates mismatches better than Lane Kiffin. So Alabama needs to go in with a simplified defensive game plan, saying, hey, we're going to make sure that we don't have any major blow-ups in our coverages, and we're just going to count on our guys to be better than your guys.
Well, it was either 14-15 or 15-16. Alabama went to the playoffs, and Ole Miss beat them both times, 2 years in a row, I believe. So they're not afraid of this moment. And Alabama's down. We'll see. We'll see how they bounce back.
You mentioned TCU earlier, Mike. This week, TCU's what I'm calling. They're playing what I'm calling a respect game when they take on Texas. Now Texas is only 6-3. A lot of undercurrents in this game. And I think the biggest one is that Gary Patterson, who was the defensive coordinator under Dennis Franchione at TCU, and then became head coach when Franchione left and went to Alabama and stayed there for 20 plus years, resigned during the middle of the season last year. Almost immediately, Sark scoops him up. And, this will be the first time that Gary Patterson is on the opposite sideline in a Texas and TCU game in over 20 years. That could be an interesting game. It also could, and I'm not saying this disrespectfully towards Sonny Dykes and what they've done in Fort Worth, but this is a game that really could either make you raise your eyebrows and take a closer look at TCU, or it could be hey, TCU, get back in your lane.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the latter. They're playing in Austin. And, hey, if TCU goes in and wins, then you can consider them. I don't think they're going to win out, but it's going to be a tough challenge. And that all the other things with Patterson and the coaching staff, those things matter. That's an interesting there's some interesting coaching issues there, not issues, but relationships now they're crossing over.
Mike, I'm just going to bring this game up. And let's face it, there are not a lot of great matchups next week. Like you didn't have the game. You're not going to have the games next week like you had yesterday. And I jokingly call this the dumpster fire bowl, but Texas A&M and Auburn, because Texas A&M, they were looking and not saying that they didn't have a flu epidemic, but in the last 12 months, no one has had more excuses for them not winning than Texas A&M. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mean they opted out of the bowl game because they didn't want to get embarrassed. You got players that are not interested. When players are disinterested at any time when they're at school, that's a problem. And you've got players that are disinterested at A&M apparently in September, October, November. It's a big problem. And, I thought Auburn showed some fight and grit. A lot of times you'll see that, like we saw with Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech. They were not very good, and he left, and the players kind of, banded together and put some good performances together. I think they won yesterday as well. But Auburn hung in there. They were down and took it to overtime. So Texas A&M, what happened to them yesterday in the flu epidemic or the flu outbreak? I don't buy that. I buy that about as much as I buy them having the issues with the bowl game last year.
I agree. And Texas A&M, if some Hollywood screenwriter is looking for a new project with a soap opera, all he needs to do she needs to move to College Station, Texas, and start writing about the Aggies, because I'm telling you, every week there is some issue that's coming out of there.
You nailed it when Jimbo was first hired. You didn't say it in a distasteful way, but you said, keep in mind, you're in the SEC West, you're Texas A&M, no offense, which is never never a good prefatory statement when somebody says no offense, but
Yeah.
you basically put it nicely. You're not Alabama. You're not Auburn. You're not LSU. And you paid all this money and the expectations were, off the charts. And they have a couple of wins against good games against Alabama and a couple of wins here and there. But look at all the losses.
Yeah. And another program that tried to do that, thought that they were going to buy glory, so to speak, is Miami. Now, I will give Miami credit. Now, at least they do have some history of saying we're capable of winning national championships because they've got several of those trophies in their case down in Coral Gables. But, Mario Cristobal, again, if we're talking about ROI, I just don't see it at Texas A&M or Miami.
No. Well, at least Jimbo knows when to take a knee. Gus Malzahn, by the way, yesterday did not know when to take a knee at the end of the game. Mm-hmm. A lot of coaching blunders. You and I texted back and forth. Coaches not knowing how to finish games. It is absurd. Cristobal can coach X's and O's. He can recruit. Terrible game day coach. Yesterday they got throttled. It didn't matter. But, is that going to work out? I don't think so.
Well, Mike, good luck with hopefully you have a easy day today in the with your NFL games, and we'll be talking tomorrow on the Morning Blitz.
Thanks, Coach. Take care.